Dr. Misty Bailey. I work in the College of Veterinary Medicine. I'm an assistant professor of practice in the Department of Biomedical and Diagnostic Sciences, but I'm also highly involved in academic and student affairs. And so I do all things curriculum and assessment over here at the College of Vet Med. I teach a course called Professional Skills, Wellness, and Ethics to veterinary students. And two of the student learning outcomes for that course are to, and I'm going to read this because it's lengthy, describe the ethical, legal, economic, and regulatory issues and principles that relate to euthanasia of various species for various reasons. So that's required by our accreditor. It's the reason that's in there, but also to communicate patient information to a client. So that's another goal of the course. And so for a few years, I had been using euthanasia case scenarios that I had found from a Creative Commons collaboration, and that was between Tufts and Cornell universities, their vet schools. And I've been requiring students to really envision a conversation with a client in one of those scenarios. And when ChatGPT came onto the scene in late 2022, I realized that our graduates would likely need to know how to use generative AI. And at that time, we didn't really have any curricular content that would help them do that. So I used ChatGPT to help me develop some ideas. So for an assignment that would use generative AI. And after some back and forth, of course, with my prompting and its output, it came up with a basic structure for an assignment. And I was then able to fill in the gaps with my own knowledge and my own research. And so what that ultimately looked like was quite a complicated assignment, but it really hits a lot of my goals for the course. And so in a nutshell, learners are asked to watch a video from the AVMA. So that's the American Veterinary Medical Association. And that's about client communication, and then select a culture or community different from their own. Learn a little bit how it views pets, death, euthanasia, heavy hitting topics, but necessary for veterinary students. I provided some resources, but students could also choose their own. And then they select one of those euthanasia case scenarios that I mentioned, and they use generative AI to have a conversation with their client. So from there, they analyze the output of the AI-assisted dialogue, and they can do that through writing or through a brief video that they turn in on Canvas. And I asked them to consider the strengths and the limitations and really reflect on how AI aligned or diverged from the competence principles that they'd already learned about. So really asking students to consider how AI could be incorporated as a tool in their future veterinary careers, and what precautions should be considered. So I also provide a rubric. It's been slightly modified, but it was empirically tested for medical education. Like most people, the way I'm using generative AI the most is for text suggestions when sending texts. So that's probably when I rely most on it. But for work, I'm using ChatGPT, that's so hard to say, and UTverse most often. I don't consider myself to be a creative person. I'm really logical and detailed, and my creative brain will only work for about an hour before it just gives up and goes home. So I use both of these tools to really help me flesh out ideas of things that I might want to do in lectures or assignments and try to make them more engaging for students. And I've also recently started using these to help me write some script to automate some of the tasks that I do. They're really easy, but they're really time consuming. And actually, our new veterinary dean, Dean Plummer, suggested that, and we'll see how it goes. I just started, but I'm really hopeful. So honestly, students have mostly loved it or hated it. And some of them have really reacted viscerally in their reflections on both ends of that spectrum. And I'm really glad that they feel comfortable enough to provide me with a genuine reflection and not just what they think I want to hear. But some of the positive reactions have been that AI has created a space to practice conversations that they could practice with classmates, but with classmates, it's difficult because you know that person and you can't really suspend that reality. Other students told me later that they're using it now to help them understand concepts in a different way. Um, but those who had a negative perception of the assignment, they found the assignment as an exercise in frustration because the output wasn't what they wanted or expected. Now, being a former English teacher, I provide detailed feedback, even for 100 students in a class. So when they're reflecting in those ways, I completely respect that. But I tell them that they've learned some important things about using AI. So it's not always ethical to use AI in certain situations. The output can be biased, and good prompting is necessary too. Well, as I mentioned earlier, that first year when ChatGPT was used, it could only have a finite number of simultaneous users. And so that was frustrating because it may have been that a student was trying to access it at a moment when they were on a waiting list to get in. It could also be kind of glitchy and there wasn't a lot of information at that time to learn how to prompt effectively. So students were kind of going in it blindly. But now I try to direct students to review the usage Q&A in UTverse so that they're learning some prompting best practices before they get started. And maybe it won't be quite as frustrating as it was that first year with ChatGPT. Incorporating AI into a course for me is a scary thing. Um, I certainly don't know everything there is to know about generative AI or large language models. I'm curious, but I feel like we're all learning together and it's important for students to understand that too. So I try to provide that in the feedback as well. So I try to share with their frustrations if they are talking about frustrations. But at the same time, I felt like it was really super important. And because of my role with the curriculum in the college, I do tend to know what's in it and what's not. And I feel like if we're not preparing students to know at least a little bit about AI by the time they graduate, we're really just doing them a disservice.